28 days earlier, he had been seized by Border Patrol in the Sonoran Desert, only to be swept into a criminal justice system designed to put men like Manuel behind bars. Not only was he sentenced to nearly a month in detention for illegal re-entry, Manuel was forever marked as a felon, a label that will prevent him from holding any legal status in this country. But what troubled Manuel was not the loss of hope for his legal status, but the fact that his wife and 3 young children had spent the last month without a source of income, father or husband, in their home of Chicago.
On May 21st, we, along with 9 other women students, embarked on a 2-week expedition to learn about the political, economic, environmental, and other social issues entrenched into the southwest borderlands. We traveled through the border towns on both the Mexico and Arizona sides and met with community members and leaders, human rights activists, enforcement officials, attorneys, and the migrants themselves. Border policy, we learned, is horrifying, both in its emotional toll and its financial cost. This cost, however, is not some accident of the system. U.S. border policy isn't broken. It's working exactly as it was designed, to discourage crossing into the United States and to make it as difficult as possible. In 1993, Border Patrol Sector Chief Sylvester Reyes in El Paso, Texas, introduced Operation Hold the Line. The strategy focused enforcement resources in urban areas so that migrants would be forced to cross the border through the deserts of rural Texas instead. At the other end of the border, in San Diego, California, Operation Gatekeeper aimed to accomplish the same, to close the border within the city and thereby push migrants into the desert. This policy creates a kind of funnel where migrants are pushed across through the rugged mountains and the winding canyons of the Tucson sector. During summer days, the heat climbs to 115 degrees or more. During winter nights, temperatures drop to hypothermic lows. Crossing on foot, it is physically impossible to carry enough water to stay hydrated. Navigation through the twisting washes and valleys is prohibitively difficult without a guide. The remains of some 6,000 migrants dead from exposure have been given to the Arizona Recovered Human Remains Project since the birth of modern border policy in the mid-1990s. Creeping militarization has shaped both the training of the Border Patrol and the tools that they use. Military technology, repurposed for border security after its use in Afghanistan and Iraq, is near ubiquitous on the border. Automated drones scour the desert floor from thousands of feet up. Huge surveillance blimps serve as additional eyes and hang in the air as potent psychological symbols of the Border Patrol's presence. Mobile security systems trucks are like cherry pickers equipped with cameras. With their platforms extended, they can see for some 10 miles around. As conflicts in the Middle East wind down, Customs and Border Protection is poised to become the next major client of military-industrial giants, such as Lockheed Martin. Securing our borders runs against patterns of north-south migration that have been ongoing for thousands of years. For much of the past century and a half, seasonal migration has cycled workers from the communities of northern Mexico to the labor-intensive agriculture of the West and back again. For years, this movement was unimpeded by tight border enforcement. Now, border policy strives to seal off patterns of migration that are firmly historical and arguably inevitable. Consequences have been disastrous.
In 2005, the Department of Homeland Security implemented Operation Streamline as a way to close down the border via the criminal justice system. Prior to 2005, immigration via the southwestern border and overstayed visas were classified as civil issues, and so all proceedings went through civil administrative courts. Following the movement towards border militarization, the 2000s saw the act of crossing the border become criminalized. Once returned directly to the Mexican side of the border, those apprehended are now charged with a criminal felony. But the streamlined process is unique and unprecedented in that it tries migrants en masse. In the Tucson courtroom, we watched as 70 men and women were escorted by plaintiffs and Border Patrol agents, bound with chains at their feet, waist, and hands. What does it mean for 70 people to be convicted as felons in the course of 45 minutes? Swept under the guise of efficiency, due process and criminal rights are all but scrapped. Each defendant is allowed no more than 20 minutes with an attorney. This is especially ironic since our group met with one of the only public defenders for nearly 2 hours. What worries these legal experts in Tucson more than anything is the precedence it sets for mass trials as the norm in all branches of the justice system. The immigration bill debated this summer would triple the capacity of defendants in a given case from 70 to 210. We are now back at Whitman, and as we readjust into our surrounding community, our border trip group continues to challenge the distance we have placed between ourselves and the reality we witness on the borderlands. The border is far from secure. If we accept the wall as a way to increase security, then we must grapple with the financial, emotional, and social consequences of our so-called security policies. Neither reversing the trend of border militarization nor calming our fear for others will be easy, but they are nonetheless feats that must be accomplished to preserve the integrity of our communities and ourselves.
She will cover you with her mantle everywhere you go. Her shawl will shade you when you are walking in the seared desert, your heart pounding loud in your ears, and your feet driving from exhaustion. During the night, when temperatures drop close to zero, she will warm you. La Virgen de Guadalupe te protegerá, hijo. The Virgin of Guadalupe will protect you, my son. These are the words ringing in your ears, words from your mother, words that you pray will hold true. You pray over and over the one simple prayer your mind can summon as you crouch under a mesquite bush, waiting for a sign from the coyote that the border patrol truck is safe out of sight, and you can resume your walk. You clutch the print of the Virgen de Guadalupe that your mother gave you after she gave you her blessing so that the Virgen will protect you from your journey from Zamora, Michoacan to Los Angeles, California, where your wife and kids live as U.S. citizens. Your two daughters, Dulce and Cecilia, are your pride and joy. You can almost feel their tiny arms wrapped around you and hear them saying, "You're back, Daddy, you're back." The memory of your girls gives you the strength to endure the harsh desert conditions and to try to cross the border no matter what the consequences might be. You begin to think about your aging father that can no longer work the land because your mother's diabetes has deteriorated her health to the point that she can no longer see. Her medicine is getting more and more expensive. Your father can't cover the cost, and he can't even get a job at one of the many maquiladoras in Zamora because he is too old and not a single corporation will hire him, a man in his 60s, while they can hire a young teenager that dropped out of school. You don't want to leave your parents to their fate, but you have no choice because you have your own family to look after. You turn the print of the Virgen de Guadalupe over in your hand and see that on the reverse side there is a calendar from 2009 advertising your favorite restaurant in Zamora called La Bandera Rosa, where they make tortillas recién hechas a mano, homemade, like the ones your mom used to make when she still had her sight. You keep looking at the calendar and the date April 30th, 2009 is screaming at you. That was the day everything changed for you. That was the day you were convicted as a felon. That was the day you became a criminal under Operation Streamline because you re-entered the U.S. after being deported once before. That was the day you lost even the slightest chance of getting permanent residency through your wife, who was a U.S. citizen. Yet here you are, in 2013, in the hot and dry Arizona desert, under the blazing sun, suddenly springing to your feet and running as fast as you can, away from your hiding spot and away from the screams of the other migrants in your group that have been caught by the Border Patrol and are being thrown in the back of their high-tech vehicles. In your haste, you don't notice that the print of the Virgen de Guadalupe slipped from your fingers and fell onto the burning Arizona soil. Here you are, running for your life. And here I am, reaching down to pick up a worn-out print of the Virgen de Guadalupe, wondering who it belonged to.
In 1994, the Border Patrol unveiled its new strategy of prevention through deterrence, explicitly designed to increase the cost and danger of crossing the border by steering migrants into harsh desert terrain. Since then, the number of migrants dying while crossing the border every year has quintupled. In Arizona, deaths went from 5 to 10 per year in the early 90s to 150 to 200 through the 2000s.
Dennis Baroni sits on his worn Adirondack chair as we crowd around him, fighting to find spots in the shade of the porch. We've been traveling for the past 5 days, so there's something comforting about the Maroney's stunning, straight-out-of-Sunset magazine ranch house, a bright oasis in the otherwise desolate desert. Maroney ranches cattle, the picture of every country music-loving, Western dreaming, urban girl's imagination. He's dressed in denim, boots, and a wide-brimmed cowboy hat. 18 miles from the border wall, Maroney's property lies right about where migrants crossing into the U.S. begin dropping their belongings. A ripped rain poncho, a discarded backpack full of extra clothes and tortilla cloths, an empty can of beans scraped clean by hungry hands. His wife used to offer food and water to those passing through, and at times the amount of traffic became overwhelming. He often wakes up to holes snipped in his fences, and more than once someone has tampered with his irrigation. To be honest, he tells us, the disruptions can be deadly to his cattle. Young calves step in discarded cans that form thick molds around their hooves, as slowly and painfully suffocating their feet as they grow. Others graze on the leftover trash, ingesting enough plastic that it forms thick balls that rip apart their stomach. It would be easy for Maroney to blame migrants for the damage to his property and cows. This is a person who is directly affected by migrants crossing the border every day. But he also knows that the damage to his cows isn't really a result of migrant traffic. In Maroney's mind, the problem that comes with living in the borderlands are a direct consequence of U.S. immigration policy. Increased border security has only led to increased insecurity in his own backyard. Does security mean drone flights passing above daily, armed and inexperienced Border Patrol agents guarding the area by taking naps on the side of the road, migrants near death passing through his land? When asked what he sees as a secure border, Maroney describes a different vision, a more open policy where people are allowed to cross in both directions. Maroney's explanation of the border, as laid out to us as we snack on a lunch of tacos and juice boxes, highlights the complex realities of living in the borderlands. Maroney's vision of a secure border doesn't end at a safer grazing for his cattle. Not only would he like the chance to work with Mexican ranchers just across the wall, trading advice that could benefit them both, but he would like to see those who live or pass through the borderlands feel more secure. As a U.S. citizen, he sees protecting the rights of migrants as a simple moral obligation. In a region where people both celebrate the combination of two cultures, while others simultaneously create a barrier to block them from each other, it's impossible to not see or feel the effect of U.S. border policy. By expanding his notion of security to encompass all those affected by the border wall, Maroney emphasized the need for our country to reevaluate our understanding of what it means to live in a place characterized by the barrier that runs through it.
In 2005, the Real ID Act suspended the following 37 federal laws in order to make way for the expansion of the border wall. National Environmental Policy Act. Endangered Species Act.
Clean Water Act.
National Historic Preservation Act.
Migratory Bird Treaty Act.
Clean Air Act. Archaeological Resource Protection Act.
The Safe Drinking Water Act.
The Noise Control Act.
The Solid Waste Disposal Act. The Comprehensive Environmental Response Compensation and Liability Act. Archaeological and Historic Preservation Act.
Antiquities Act.
Historic Sites, Buildings, and Antiquities Act.
The Wild and Scenic Rivers Act.
Farmland Protection Policy Act.
Coastal Zone Management Act.
The Wilderness Act.
The Federal Land and Policy Management Act.
National Wildlife Refuge System Administration Act. Fish and Wildlife Act of 1965. Fish and Wildlife Coordination Act.
Administrative Procedure Act.
Otay Mountain Wilderness Act of 1999.
California Desert Protection Act.
National Park Service Organic Act.
National Park Service General Authorities Act.
National Parks and Recreation Act of 1978.
The Arizona Desert Wilderness Act.
The Rivers and Harbors Act of 1899. Equal Protection Act. Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act.
American Indian Religious Freedom Act.
Religious Freedom Restoration Act.
National Forest Management Act of 1976.
Multiple Use and Sustained Yield Act of 1960.
Federal Granting Cooperative Agreement Act of 1977.
I met a man named Victor in Mexico. His dark hair was cropped tightly, and his mustache was thin and well-groomed. He occasionally twisted the end of his mustache, out of nervousness or habit. It's hard to say. As we talked, he often showed off his easy smile, which revealed 2 rows of uneven teeth. The smile disappeared when I asked him how he came to be here, at a migrant shelter in Nogales, Mexico. "I got arrested," he said with finality, as if this explained everything. We probed him a little bit further, and his vanishing smile made a world of sense. Victor lived in Chandler, Arizona for his entire life. He came to the United States from Mexico 22 years ago, carried across the border by his mother when he was just 3 months old. He provided for his mother and his 2 younger siblings, had a good job, bought his family a house. Then he made a mistake. Drinking and driving, a DUI, getting arrested and hauled to the police station, where it was quickly discovered his papers were fake. He was deported to Nogales the next day. He attempted to cross the border to the US, but he was caught. Back to Nogales, one more try to cross the border, but he was caught again. "I had no choice," Victor said. "I had to get back to my family." He was charged with felony reentry and spent 3 months in prison. With this charge on his record, he has practically 0 chance to ever qualify for legal status in the US. "I don't feel at home in Mexico," he said. "I've always lived in the United States. I don't speak Spanish well." Next to Victor was a young woman named Catalina. He had met her at dinner the previous night. She didn't speak English. She did occasionally favor us with a smile, but I couldn't help but notice that the smile never reached her eyes. We asked her what she was from. "Southern Mexico," came the terse reply. Later, my friend and translator Leslie would guess she was actually from El Salvador. Central American refugees are often vague with information about where they come from. Technically, the migrant shelters are for Mexican citizens only. Catalina had never been to the United States. She was caught with the searchlight of a Border Patrol helicopter while attempting to cross with 4 other women. They had seen lights in the distance and thought it was a city, but it was a Border Patrol station. Their coyote, their guide, had fled and they had tried to run. Catalina pulled up her right pant leg and showed us a cluster of recently healed wounds on her knee, shin, and ankle. "Cactus," she said. I fell. She was apprehended and spent 30 days in prison. As we continued to talk, Catalina opened up. She spoke of her young son, who she had left with her mother while trying to go find work in the U.S. She hadn't heard from either of them since. I asked them both now, "Where will you go from here?" While Victor paused, Catalina waited for Leslie's translation patiently. Her answer was immediate. "I'm going home." She said crossing the border was too hard. We turned to Victor expectantly and saw a devilish grin play about his lips. "Yo me voy a donde ella se va," he said. "I'm going wherever she goes." Catalina gasped and punched him, giggling. Victor playfully winced at her blows and grinned at me with those crooked teeth. But Victor was not going where Catalina was going. Later, he told us he intended to cross the border again soon. He missed his family. If he didn't get back to work soon, they would lose the house he bought for them. His life is in the U.S., just like mine is. It occurred to me suddenly that he'd lived there longer than I had. Catalina and Victor were being pulled apart by the same set of circumstances that brought them together. By now, Victor is either safely in the U.S., with his family, or in prison again, missing his family more than ever. Catalina is likely home in southern Mexico, or beyond into Central America, wherever her home really is. But for that brief moment, Victor and Catalina weren't migrants, and they weren't criminals. No families depended upon them. They were just people, sitting in creaky metal folding chairs with 2 Americans, laughing, flirting, and being distinctly and tangibly human.
Open quote. Operation Streamline is unlike anything else in the American criminal justice system. End quote. Laura Conifer, Federal Public Defender, District of Arizona.
Enter the special proceedings room of Arizona District Court. Originally built to house naturalization hearings, now home to the government's latest experiment in mass deportation. Chains clank around the arms, legs, waists of 70 brown bodies Their 8 collective attorneys sanitized their white hands in between symbolic paper shufflings and adjustments of their loud, graphic ties. Today, one of these ties features Groucho Marx. The room is long, the visitors' pew is mostly empty, 5 microphones stand at attention in front of the raised judge's bench. As if by conveyor belt, the latest beneficiaries of American justice respond to the same 5 questions with the same 3 answers. Sí, no, culpable.
Sí, no, culpable.
Sí, no, culpable.
Sí, no, culpable. Sí, no, culpable.
Sí, no, culpable.
No, culpable.
Sí, no, culpable.
Sí, no, culpable.
Sí, no, culpable.
The interpreter translates. Yes, no, guilty. Close your eyes, and the clanking chains, shuffling feet, and faint smell of unwashed bodies lends itself to familiar images. A cattle barn, a slave auction. But no, this is Operation Streamline, the epitome of Border Patrol's latest strategy, the consequence delivery system. Deterrence in the form of a felony charge, keeping immigrants off our streets and in our jails. Brute efficiency, with just enough due process to keep Mr. Marx Brothers' ties sleeping soundly at night, and enough semblance of security enforcement to overlook the inconvenient push-pull factors that have gathered us here today in the special proceedings room of Arizona District Court. Now jump to Grupos Beta, a migrant shelter where the deterred masses are sent upon formal deportation. Here, the thought of an impending felony charge is barely a blip on the radar. Instead, a Oaxacan woman weighs the danger of the desert with the depth of her debt back home, the family she must support, and the minimum wage that barely covers food. So let's talk about deterrence for a second. As an ideal, deterrence conditions behavior by making unfavorable decisions result in unfavorable outcomes. For example, the risk of crossing the border is increased by putting a felony charge on the table. What Operation Streamline seems to ignore are the risks facing migrants on the other side of the border. If the Fed wants to implement effective deterrence, they will have to out-deter poverty, gang violence, and unemployment, and outweigh the desire to earn a living wage and reunite separated families. Operation Streamline is founded on an understanding of immigration that doesn't jive with the reality of the border. It creates an illusion of successful deterrence that actively obscures the root causes of migration. It's not streamlined, it's sloppy. Now jump to Washington, D.C., the epicenter of this fundamental disconnect between policy and reality. Here, immigration reform manifests itself as a pathway to citizenship modeled after a minefield, riddled with qualifiers and exceptions that eliminate nearly half of the 11 million would-be Americans. This comes hand in hand with provisions to triple the deterring power of Border Patrol. Instead of the current 70-person cap on Operation Streamline trials, imagine the efficiency of 210 brown bodies with chains clanking, feet shuffling. Sí, no, culpable. Now back to the courtroom, where the brown bodies breathe a sigh of relief as their felony charge is waived just as quickly as it was invented. See, says Groucho Marx, you got off easy. Just a little time served and we'll send you back home safe and sound. But the story doesn't end there. Now enter the true beneficiaries of American justice, the Corrections Corporation of America. The private prison industry graciously opens its doors to 70 new payments of $120 a day. And after 30, 60, 180 days, these same brown bodies are sent back to their families and their debt and another long desert crossing. The system isn't broken, it's functioning at highest capacity. The system doesn't need fixing, it needs breaking.
Quote, "The prison industrial complex is an enterprise whereby lawbreakers and undocumented immigrants are commodified as raw materials for private profit."
Immigrants have overtaken drug offenders as the largest segment of prisoners in federal prisons and jails.
I met Rogelio this summer during my travels through the U.S.-Mexico border. Under the blazing sun, I noticed that there, underneath the tent, sat a young, 16-year-old boy, blankly staring out into the open desert. He had just arrived to the No More Deaths camp not too long ago. He was waiting for his feet to heal from the boot or blisters he acquired during his expedition through the desert. He was timid at first, but his smile was extremely contagious. After dinner, we showed him how to play the game of spoons. My eyes quivered with enthusiasm. I sat there and watched as my friend Ashley shuffled the deck. She gave each of us 4 cards, and in a split second, the game began. I frantically picked a card one by one, and continued to pass the cards clockwise. My palms sweating bullets each time I picked up a different one. When someone had 4 at the same time, that's when the real game began. Each of us competed against one another in order to grab a spoon. We were all fighting one another for the scarce resource. I felt my heart bulging through my chest, my adrenaline rushing as the cards were in motion. I had to move fast and with great agility if I wanted to win the game. When all of a sudden, boom, Fabiola snatched the spoon. That's when all hell broke loose. And in 1, 2, 3, whew, I managed to acquire a spoon. Everyone grabbed one, except for Rogelio. Rogelio was born in Mexico City. He and his family came to the United States for a better future, just like any other migrant family. He lived in Los Angeles, California for a great part of his life. He went to school here and worked in an auto body shop for some time before he got deported. Now he was back in the States, hoping to return to the place he once called home. We played the game again, and for a second time, Rogelio did not get the spoon. Later, I found out that Rogelio turned himself in to Border Patrol. Did he realize that his heart did not belong in the U.S., or did he realize that he just could not play spoon in the dream? We played a third time, and yet again, Rogelio didn't get the spoon. Rogelio couldn't get the spoon, but not because he did not want to. His hands were cleaning the blisters from his feet, so I got the spoon. His hands were cleaning the sweat that ran across his forehead as he roofed a mansion in Orange County, so I got the spoon. His hands were busy picking strawberries in Watsonville, so I got the spoon. His hands were busy cleaning the bathrooms at Whitman College, so I got the spoon. It wasn't Rogelio's fault that he wasn't able to gather a spoon. It was a simple fact that because I got the spoon, he didn't. It's just all one big crazy game. Keep the spoon away from the migrant. The game of spoons, much like the American dream, is a farce, a harshly crafted scheme that, no matter the consequences, never seems to be in favor of migrants. People worry about migrants taking jobs, benefits, spoons, from people that really need them. But as the political theorist Joseph Cairns contends, one of the ways in which those in power maintain privileges is by getting people to focus on potential trade-offs between those who are badly off and those who are worse off, thereby treating their own privileges as a background given that cannot be challenged. Thank you.
It's not only the private entrepreneurs or firms that make a profit, although they are important, but it's also the ways in which an entire path has been created around how to deal with certain problems. An entire development path has been created through the assumption that there is a perpetual enemy who must always be fought, but who can never be conquered. And that's where international militarization and domestic militarization meet, at this notion that there's the production of an enemy around which we organize everything, not simply profit.
The United States lies a mere 600 meters north, true border territory. And over a watery cream of broccoli soup, I discussed large-scale immigration reform with a woman named Maria. We sit at a table in a migrant shelter where Maria has been staying for the past couple nights. This food is not going to fill me up, is my initial thought, until Maria's ideas on the U.S.-Mexico border spew like a newly unkinked garden hose, flooding my mind with wholly novel concepts. Much like our elected representatives, the other students on my trip and myself have been struggling for any sort of answers to the immigration mess we'd observed. I began to wonder why I wasn't Representative Maria debating these ideas in Congress. My hands seemed to instinctively shoot to my pockets periodically during this conversation, clutching the small blue book with the words United States of America emblazoned across the cover. Maria has been explaining to me that she is here to attempt to cross the border into the United States, but her words catch me off guard. I want to go home, she begins, as I try to keep my eyebrows from arching in surprise. But I must cross. I try to put on an understanding face as I struggle to understand this contradiction. Meanwhile, my hands fumble for the blue book but fail to find it in my pocket. Did it fall out? Did I leave it in the van? I try to remain engaged while my hands nervously search for that blue book. I ask Maria what I should do, how I can help. If you come back to Mexico, she says, her unwavering eye contact bring my mind back to the conversation. Please bring your factories with you. Then I can stay here. My hands finally feel the outline of the blue book and my heart rate slows. Her words begin to make sense as they fight past the expectations I had of impoverished migrants. She doesn't want to be in the United States. She wants to be home. A plastic tarp in downtown Nogales, Mexico, provided us with a much-needed respite from the hot sun. We wrapped up a conversation with fired maquiladora workers, my blue book still firmly in hand. Maquiladoras, factories that simply assemble parts for a parent company in the United States, were a direct product of NAFTA. A few months ago, these workers had shown up to Maquiladora only to see that their workplace was entirely shut down and locked. I looked at the dark Maquiladora and saw the workers' nervousness and uncertainty. But now, without any reliable means of income, my mind flashed to the bathroom stall at Sycamore Valley Elementary School. With my pants around my knees, the school bully swung open the door and flicked off the bathroom lights, laughing obnoxiously as I was left in the pitch-black stall. My blue book now represented something else. It seemed to be the bully, the one taking advantage of Mexico to further its own economic power. I expected the workers to see this too, to fault the U.S. for instigating NAFTA and creating a maquiladora system that has caused many to look north for better opportunities. But after thanking the workers for their time, the spokesman replied in a remarkable way. Instead of laying blame, he explained that all North Americans would be welcomed by Mexicans with open arms. For we are sister countries, he added with a smile. Once again, my expectations were entirely off the mark. I couldn't help but wonder just what else my blue book and I were wrong about.
The economic cost to migrants of crossing the border has doubled to an average of $2,500. Migrants often take out loans of 12 to 15% interest per month to pay this cost. Sometimes the loans actually come from U.S. labor contractors. In no uncertain terms, the Border Patrol's goal of increasing the expense and deadliness of the crossing has succeeded. Has this prevented or slowed flows of migration? Studies disagree. Some say that massive increases in enforcement have had a small impact on migration flows compared to other factors like the U.S. recession. Others say there has been no impact at all.
General Napolitano, former Secretary of Homeland Security, once said, "Show me a 50-foot wall, and I'll show you a 51-foot ladder."
After days of hearing the stories of migrants, shaped by the mouths of border activists and volunteers, I had begun to approach visits to migrant shelters with the twisted intention of finding the most tragic story, one that would emotionally shake audiences at home like you into action. So as Maria bent to the courtyard floor of the migrant shelter in Agua Prieta to demonstrate how truly backbreaking it is to pick strawberries, tobacco, and green tomatoes in South Carolina fields, I began asking her pointed questions about her challenges crossing the border with her son and son-in-law. During pauses in translation, I wondered if the son-in-law's Timberland boots would make it across the desert, and why was he being so quiet? His eyes met mine for a moment, and then he spoke. Once the translation had crossed through several minds and bodies to my own, I froze. How could I respond to a question about how do you feel about migrants? It was more than a question. It was a statement that uncovered my privilege of being the interviewer, a US citizen who had paid for a pricey plane ticket to the Southwest and held the right passport. I didn't have to worry about being separated from my mother, my father, or my little sister for months, if not years. I didn't have to worry about finding a job without the proper documents. I didn't have to worry about dying alone in an empty desert canyon. Flustered, I stammered something silly along the lines of, well, we're here to listen to your stories because we want to understand, and I believe we share a lot of the same values. Spanish wasn't thick enough to mask my incoherent thoughts because he responded with, you know, Americans don't want to do the work we do. It's not popular, it's hard. Not only was he completely right, but his questions revealed my piece in the border puzzle. My uncomfortable stammering, the hot blush coloring my cheeks, and my gaze shifting downward were all symptoms of the realization of how much power I had in asking questions. It made me think less about his boots and their durability, and more about where my own shoes were allowed to walk and what I was allowed to do in those steps.
The first person we met on our trip was a pastor at a local church named John Fife. In the 1980s, John was part of the sanctuary movement that harbored Central Americans in churches. They crossed into the country illegally, running away from violence in their home country. We asked John how, knowingly risking significant jail time, he continued with the movement. He looked us in the eye and said, "We had no choice but to act."
If you were given a slip of paper before coming into this auditorium, can you please take a moment to refresh your mind on your given scenario? Please look up once you are done. You were all given scenarios of people who have migrated to the U.S. in many different forms and for a number of different reasons. It is estimated that in the United States there are about 11 million undocumented people. This next activity is a simulation to give you all an idea of what the most recent proposed Senate immigration bill means for the path to citizenship. In a moment, I will ask everyone to stand. I will read off different scenarios and indicate whether you, as your character, should remain standing or if you should be seated. Please remain silent throughout this activity. Does anyone have any questions? At this moment, can I please have everyone stand? And only if you received a slip. Worked in a meatpacking job in Iowa, but an injury on the job caused him to stop working. Since his income fell below the poverty line, he will not qualify for this bill. Please be seated. Margarita de Leon is a housekeeper, but she does not speak or comprehend English. It is estimated that about 3.5 to 5.8 billion people can be excluded from the bill from an English language requirement. Please be seated. Juan Carlos Gomez was brought to the U.S. at the age of 5. However, since he served in the military, he is eligible. Please remain standing. Josefa Ortega has lived in the U.S. for more than 30 years, but left Mexico to visit her father last year. Since Josefa was out of the country for more than 180 days, she does not qualify. Please be seated. Georgina Sarasua was brought as an infant, and she now attends UCLA. She is a dreamer, so she is able to navigate the bill through the dreamer path. Please remain standing. Enrique Morales is a successful landscaping business owner, but his record indicated that he had a run-in with the law at the age of 18. Since he has been convicted under the law, he is ineligible. Please be seated. Mauricio Reyes has worked in agriculture for 5 years and now as a janitor. Please remain standing. Mark Ortega has lived in the U.S. for 30 years and has had a steady job in construction. His income does not fall below the poverty line. Please remain standing. Ana Castañeda has worked as a nanny since she came to the U.S. and makes beyond the standard living wage. Please remain standing. Isabel Martinez used to live in Chiapas, but recently migrated to Florida because of drought in her hometown. Since Isabel arrived in 2013, she does not qualify for this bill. Please be seated. Please look around. About half of the people are left standing, but it is estimated that only about half of the people remaining standing will actually qualify under this bill and be able to go through the process. Going through this process can take up to 15 years, and it is easy to become disqualified. For example, even though Mauricio Reyes is still working, he no longer qualifies for the agriculture worker requirements to go through the process under this bill. He needs to work in agriculture for 150 days during 3 out of his 5 first years in the U.S. He may be able to start the process over, but this will mean another 13 years wait. Mauricio Reyes, please be seated. Both Mark Ortega and Ana Castañeda are doing well economically in the first round. But when the economic recession hits in 2022, they get kicked off the path. Mark Ortega loses his job and he is unemployed for 60 days, and as a result must be deported. Ana Castañeda wage briefly dips below 125% of the federal poverty level, so after 10 years of waiting, she is disqualified. Mark Ortega and Ana Castañeda, please be seated. As shown by the infographic on the screen, people can become disqualified throughout the process if they leave to their country and come back, make below a certain wage at any particular time, and much more. This shows that even though the immigration bill is a solution, it is still leaving a lot of people out of the equation. This is a solution to propose, but as we see, there are many obstacles within it. Everyone, please be seated. And we just want to thank you one more time for coming to our presentation. I know it's a busy weekend, and we'll open it up to questions and answers, and we'll give brief introductions. Thank you. I'm Ashley, and I am a junior.
Hi, I'm Genevieve, and I am a senior politics major.
My name's Sean, and I'm a senior religion major.
I'm Julia, and I'm a senior politics major.
I'm Kate, and I'm a junior politics major.
I'm Andrea, and I'm a sophomore politics major.
I'm Andrew, and I'm a sophomore ES Bio major.
I'm Justin, I'm a junior rhetoric major.
I'm Fabiola, and I'm a junior psychology and Spanish double major.
Hello, my name is Wesley Rodriguez. I am a junior politics major.
So if you guys have any questions, feel free to shout out.
So what part of the borderlands did you actually travel? Did you go from Lima to past Mexico, or did you just stay in the Tucson, Nogales area?
We went to Tucson and then to Nogales and then to Dallas, which is like 2 hours east of Tucson, and then off of Red Tahoe.
And I think part of the reason why we were going there, I think Sean and Julia mentioned it in their speech, was that the most recent U.S. border policy has actually funneled people into the Sonora, Arizona border desert as a way of deterring migrants, because it's the most dangerous area to cross. So they think if people die in the desert, or if it's too hard to cross and that word is spread, people won't cross. Whereas like in the 90s, people were traveling more through California and those routes.
When people are found to be in the U.S. illegally, they gather and take to central areas for deportation, or does each state or each city have its own area that deals with it?
Customs and Border Protection has split up the U.S. and Mexico border into different sectors. So we were mostly in the Tucson sector. If you're picked up by Border Patrol, you may or may not qualify for Operation Streamline. CBP has sort of internal mechanisms for determining who qualifies for Streamline. It's not entirely clear from the outside how they determine that. If you do qualify for Streamline and you'll be charged with a felony, then you will have sort of the mass trial that we were describing, where 70 people are put through the courtroom in the space of about 45 minutes. If you aren't charged with a felony, if you don't go through Streamline, then you'll probably just be deported straight out.
You just mentioned that you met with Border Patrol agents. What were your impressions of that experience?
That was quite an interesting experience. They actually had like a prepared statement and kind of a PowerPoint that they showed us. And so a woman who was newish on the job, she kind of gave this presentation of their security policies and apprehension numbers and statistics. And halfway through, her boss came and sat and watched the whole presentation. So they definitely have a different way of going about things. But we got a tour and were able to see and interact with other Border Patrol agents in a less strict manner and got kind of off the cuff answers.
A lot of the rhetoric of Border Patrol is very much centered on preventing terrorists from crossing into the U.S. and preventing potential weapons of mass destruction from being carried over the border.
And also, like, there were strange gender dynamics, like, it was weird, but it's really easy to blame the Border Patrol. You know, like, they're the ones out there, there's extreme amounts of brutality that goes undocumented, and it's really easy to walk in there and be like, what are you doing, you know? But we really had to take a step back and realize that a lot of the people who go into Border Patrol don't come from the easiest backgrounds within the U.S. either, and the starting salary and the accoutrements that come with a Border Patrol job are great. So it's like, the Border Patrol is something like that obviously has problems, but we have to problematize that as well. Because a lot of people really do think that they're protecting their families and that they're protecting their country, and what they're doing is really good.
A lot of them are veterans of Iraq and Afghanistan, and the rate of suicide in the Border Patrol is higher than it is in any other federal agency.
What's the average price that these people have to pay to guides? Are guides still being used extensively? Are they related to drug folks, or are they just enterprises in Central America and Mexico? What's the going price of a guide to get through the Sonora Desert?
Most people that we talked to were paying between $2,000 and $3,000 US to get across, which is a lot more than they were paying 10 or 15 years ago. And the cartels have really kind of taken over the business of getting migrants across the border, and so now there's a lot more extortion and a lot more, kidnappings and random. I talked to some migrants who've been tortured by the cartels in the desert, and so it's gone. So they've kind of taken that over, and we thought they'd have dropped the prices because.
Was there any, during your experience, was there any parts of the system that seemed worth focusing on and expanding to help them? Were there parts that were helpful to people? Did you find parts of it that being successful?
Well, I mean, there are, not on the U.S. side, I think there were very few, if not, it was mostly nonprofits, and different community organizations like No More Deaths and the Good Samaritans that go out into the desert and do humanitarian work and water in the desert and treat people for injuries, which some of us on this program have been able to do. On the Mexican side, there's a lot of really interesting programs. I mean, we can talk about Cafe Justo, we can talk about ICFA, we can talk about Grupo Spreta. I'll tackle Cafe Justo. But they are a business that roasts coffee within Mexico. So Mexican produce coffee, they link up with farmers and can actually work with farmers. Because a lot of the times when beans are roasted within the United States, a lot of the cost that comes from producing coffee is exported to the United States as well. And so there's not much capital flowing in Mexico. But and there's also a lot more jobs created. So that was one example of a specialty job that we felt contributed to the betterment of the migration situation.
We got to visit San Juan Bosque, which is a shelter on the Sonoran side of Nogales city. It's on the Mexican side, on the Sonoran side, it's 500,000 people. It's the only shelter in the city that's open at night for migrants, which is kind of crazy. It's very, very simple. It's like 2 or 3 rooms. Most of the nights they have people sleeping on the floor. And they told us that they had more than 1 million people pass through their doors since they by their own count, which is kind of incredible. They work on a shoestring to put these people up because it gets really, really cold there during the winter especially. And Nogales is kind of like a hotbed of exploitation for people from Central America and Southern Mexico who come up who sort of can't navigate Nogales. Yeah, so that was pretty inspirational.
So you guys studied this, and I was going to ask also, this using microphones, so those of us who don't hear very well. You studied this, you've gone down, you spent time there, you're aware of what the policies are, what the current Senate bills, what those are. What, and clearly, our immigration system needs a lot of help. What do you collectively, after spending time down there with these people and seeing how the border patrol works or doesn't work, have you spent time discussing what you think would work for our country and for the migrant workers who obviously, we especially need them? What kind of a policy do you feel would actually possibly work for everyone?
Yeah, we talked a lot about addressing the root causes of why people are migrating in the first place. So instead of focusing on like after the fact that they're here and that's an issue, why don't we address it by looking at what U.S. policies are affecting the economic situation in Mexico and how we can change our relationship to make it so people don't feel like they have to leave their homes in the first place. That was one of the big things we talked about. The answers are really hard to grasp. It's like even understanding the situation is an enormous task. And several of us have been taking a seminar class that is exploring this in a more academic setting. And I think one thing that I've taken from that is just the questioning of what my part is in immigration. Because every single person in this room, in some way or another, is involved in immigration. Whether that's a family member, a friend, someone who might come and do yard work, voting power. Everyone in this room has some part in immigration. And I think part of the first step at looking towards a better future for migrants is questioning our position in that. And it's really complicated, and it's personal, and it's a lot more challenging than saying, let's do A, B, and C in policy recommendations. But I think it's a starting point. And I know as I look into options after college and what I'm gonna do, it's scary, but I want to base it in what my role is and how I can create change through my location in American society.
We live on the Arizona border. We're right on the border wall almost. It's a very complex issue. I agree that you have to start personally, but it's a global problem also. We're not the only nation that has migration problems. The people of Mexico have given more to me than I could ever give to them. And what these students have said, it's all true, every bit of it. So take all of it and mix it around in your own head and see what you can do. It's a mess. The man that you quoted, Moroni, or the rancher, that man is like 4th generation ranching on Aravaca, right? Is that where he is? He went down in his pajamas 2 months ago to fix his irrigation ditch in the middle of the night, and the Border Patrol came in with guns and questioned who he was. They knew who he was. So I cannot write off the Border Patrol. I know how nasty they are. I've been questioned by them. I have friends who go in the desert and take water down in Naco and in Agua Prieta. It's not a pretty sight. Border towns are very different than vacation towns in Mexico. Don't think you can take a vacation in Mexico and learn about it. You can't. You have to find a Mexican citizen who will share with you their plight. And they're very willing to do that. They're very open, they're very kind, they're very generous. They may be taking care of your grandchildren or your children. So be very aware that our government is not a victim. Our government is the perpetrator. And we need to look at that, I think.
Thank you for sharing. I think we'll have time for one more question. Yeah.
I'm wondering why you all decided to go on the trip, and also what's one thing that you're taking back to do
Yeah, the one thing I knew about the border before I went on this trip was that I didn't know anything about the border and immigration. Still a lot to learn, obviously. There's a lot of things to take back. I think that things like Operation Streamline and the stories that we heard are something that are things that will stick with me forever. But it was, I think, connecting with the migrants at migrant shelters was a very powerful experience, and talking one-on-one with people who we see like in the infographic that was just up. Those types of numbers that you see, just a single stick figure with like 3.6 million next to them. Talking to one of those people was an amazing experience.
And similarly, I didn't know much about immigration when I went on the trip, and that was my main reason for going. And I guess one main thing that I've taken away is just recognizing the power dynamics that we saw at play so blatantly on the border, and then now being able to recognize those going on around me in my everyday life and recognizing my own role in them, like Jenny was saying, has been really powerful and something that has affected daily life since then. Same. I knew immigration was same. I knew immigration was an issue, but I didn't really like I knew I had an opinion about it, but didn't really know what that opinion was. So I figured it'd be good to actually figure it out. And I think the biggest thing for me was realizing how easy it is to just forget about what happened there, and because it's not something I encounter in my day-to-day life here, and like the need to do things like this and kind of educate other people about what we saw to make sure it's an issue that's known more about.
So thank you guys for coming. Have a great evening.